Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where should we go to first? Well, I know I've got this article up. I'm not going to go there. First, we're going to go to look at some of the photos that have just come out about the submarine that was hit in the dry docks in Sevastopol recently, the Rostov-on-Don. As Dead District says here, the Rostov-on-Don has left the chat. Okay, so here we have some images of the damage done to the submarine, and I mean, I can't see this as being anything more than a write-off. Lots is now being said about these images and the ramifications of the strikes. So with regard to the last post, says Tim White, I found the original. Happy to credit CIT team, conflict intelligence team, but the story is not yet on their Twitter account. So analysts agree that while it is in theory possible to repair, it's unlikely to happen. Okay, so what does this CIT team say? CIT had it at its disposal photographs of the Rostov-on-Don submarine taken after the attack on the Sevastopol marine plant. Judging by the photo, the submarine received two strikes. One of them is located on top of the bow of the submarine. Experts previously announced it based on satellite images. The second hit was on the starboard side of the boat in the area behind the wheelhouse. It, unlike the first one, cannot be recorded from satellite images. Norwegian independent naval analyst Tor Are Iversen, to whom we provided these photos, believes that both hits pierced the submarine's strong hull. As a result of the damage, the torpedo and living compartments were damaged, as well as possibly auxiliary rooms behind the latter and batteries. It is unclear from the photographs from the outside how much the other compartments were burned, depending on whether the hatches between the compartments were battened down. According to the expert, damage of this degree will most likely remove the submarine from the active fleet until the end of the war. So I think, am I correct in saying that's quarter of the cruise missile firing submarines, which is huge, but I may be wrong there. But that's hugely significant. Although repairing it is theoretically possible, this will likely require transporting the submarine to the Admiralty shipyards in St. Petersburg, but most likely repairs of this scale are unprofitable, and it is easier to build a new boat of the same class since production of the project continues. Just to remind you of those images, this is significant damage, and possibly as well fire around the submarine might have damaged the sound reducing tiles that are clad onto the submarine. Now, Andrew Perpetua here says, although, you know, there's a bit of a few swear words and whatnot, but he says, and his point is really, really good here. So really cruddy air defense can't even protect bloomin' submarine from a cruise missile, he says in fruitier language. Oh, let me just fly this cruise missile directly into the heart of your most important military base and sink your submarine. The air defense is, not doing an awful lot, as he provides some memes to show. Everyone, Russia's got great air defense. Russian air defense, oh dear, doesn't show much effectiveness here as the submarine is taking a few hits. Now, this is NATO and not even trying. Like, NATO reluctantly sending borderline obsolete weapons, and Russia can't even withstand the smallest, and I mean the effing tiniest of attacks. Imagine if we were shooting 1,000 Tomahawks into Russia instead of like 4 Storm Shadows or whatever. The best part of this is that Russia can't even do anything about it. They already foolishly escalated all the way to the top of their escalation curve. I mean, what are they going to do? Shoot more missiles? Oh, wow. Like, they haven't done that before. They have just got to take this and accept it. This is such a good point. Right, 2 points here. 3 points. One, Ukraine are able to get into the very heart of the Russian kind of military machine in occupied territories of Ukraine. This is the heart of Sevastopol, which should have, I mean, this is a Black Sea, home of the Black Sea Fleet, should have the very best air defences around it, protecting it. Of course, it did have, but Ukraine have been, gradually attriting those air defences in a really systematic and methodical manner. And that's really good. And that leaves Sevastopol wide open to attacks such as this. So they've got a couple of Storm Shadows in. They've caused huge amounts of damage with just a couple of Storm Shadows. And he's right to say, look, this is NATO not even trying. So if you were, okay, let's leave the NATO idea for a second and just look at if Ukraine were provided with, say, 1,000 Tomahawks and doing what you'd expect from like Desert Storm, where you're absolutely throwing in Tomahawk missiles by the bucket load. Imagine Ukraine were able to attack Russia with the kind of levels of munitions and ordnance that NATO would expect to use. They would be absolutely hammering Russia. And yet, what they've got is just a bunch of cruise missiles that the UK and France have kind of luckily given them. And they're still wreaking this much havoc. I mean, if NATO went to war with Russia, Russia would be, and I've said this since the beginning of the war, since realizing the Russian army is just not what it's cracked up to be. NATO would make mincemeat of Russia within days. Just is this the best Russia can do defensively? To protect their really high value assets. My goodness, but it's also an issue for Russia in what do they do now in response to this? Well, they've already done that as far as I can work out, which is another wave. As Perpetua takes a mickey here, it's another wave of missiles. Well, what whoop-de-doo? That's all you can do. That's the only place you can go short of nuclear. Now, of course, we don't want to be urging them on to go to that level of escalation and retaliation. But really, if they're not going to do that, then they're stuck with just sending over some more cruise missiles. Well, last night, 100% of the cruise missiles were shot down. Okay, send some more Shahed drones. Well, what do you do? I mean, as long as Ukraine can receive the military assistance that they are at present getting, and it'd be great if we could give them more, then Russia I can't see as prevailing in any way. I mean, what I get worried about is what the situation is in certain countries like Slovakia and potentially the US. So the US kind of simmers down on its support for Ukraine, then that's a real challenge. If a country like Slovakia, and they've announced today, the guy leading in the polls there says, we're not going to give any more weapons to Ukraine if I get into power. So that's your ultra right-wing government coming into power and having sympathies for Putin's authoritarian regime. Okay, if that happens in another number of countries, then I worry, because really Russia can be taken. It's so frustrating, because you look at this and you think, just give them everything they need right now. Give them bloody ATACMS by next week. And the part of me really hopes, and part of me actually genuinely thinks they probably are getting ATACMS now. And the announcement that will come this week in New York from Zelensky and Biden might go to that end, which is to say, thank you for giving it. The US announcing that they're giving Ukraine ATACMS, while at the same time they're already out there. That's what I hope, and they can use these, because goodness me, if the time bomb is ticking in terms of, that clock is ticking in terms of continued support for Ukraine, then we need to give them everything we possibly can and give it to them now. I think Andrew Perpetua's points are absolutely bang on here. Russia have no answer to weaponry like this. Well, then let's give them more of that. Let's give them ATACMS, and let's give them cruise missiles, and let's just finish this thing. For goodness sake, finish this thing. Now, Granger, here's a thread from Granger, who has some expertise, it appears, in terms of Sevastopol's dry docks here and their capabilities to fix up ships and whatnot. So he says the strike on, and keeping this topically aligned, the strike on Sevastopol last September the 13th would be the first time that Ukraine has struck a naval support facility in the heart of the Black Sea Fleet. Fleet maintenance played a vital role in the sustainment of the Black Sea Fleet, even with the increased threats. Okay, Sevastopol served as the city that housed both the Imperial, Soviet and the Ukrainian Naval HQ and Russian Naval HQ in the Black Sea. With a city that has deep roots in naval history, naval shipbuilding and ship repair eventually would follow. Shipbuilding in the city would start when the then Akhtiar Admiralty was founded alongside the city in 1783. This yard would be the primary ship repair centre in the city and peninsula until the formation of the 13th ship repair plant in 1945. Akhtiar would become known as Sevastopol Marine Plant today and was privatised. At the same time, the 13th SRZ is unique in that it is under a Russian MOD and not under a civilian state enterprise. These two shipyards shouldered the majority of fleet maintenance since they were built. Other yards also existed for warship ship repair like Mykolaiv and Zaliv, but either those were more focused on the civilian cargo, fishing and passenger ship businesses, manufacturing of components, or they were too small to accommodate larger fleet vessels. And that's the problem with Novosibirsk over on the Black Sea, is it's just not a big enough port, not deep enough to really act as a good replacement for Sevastopol. So after the dissolution of the USSR, Russia lost the majority of its ship repair and construction facilities in the Black Sea, with only the 13th shipyard being the only ship repair centre available to handle significant warship repairs. Naval equipment maintenance facilities are also in the city. With the agreement between Ukraine and Russia regarding Sevastopol and renting it for the use of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, it also means access to one of the largest shipyards for maintenance, that being Samorzavod. The setup ended up being that the Russian Navy, via the 13th Ship Repair Centre, would contract Samorzavod, now a privatised Ukrainian company, to conduct maintenance on Russian naval vessels, especially regarding capacity, as the 13th SRV only has 2 floating dry docks. So both the naval maintenance facilities in the Black Sea Fleet and the equipment repair facilities are secured, and they do not have to reshuffle the majority back to mainland Russia. But they also have plans to develop Novosibirsk as a rear base for the Black Sea Fleet. However, after the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, they now have complete control of the major ship repair plants and shipyards needed to sustain the Russian Black Sea Fleet in the long run, which further justifies their goals of keeping it Russian regardless. Okay. But after the strikes on September the 13th, the sustainment and survival of the fleet are now in question. Ukraine has shown that it can strike manufacturing and maintenance facilities, which is an enabler of the Russian war effort. What is there to keep them away from other facilities? Then there is a question, but what about Feodosia, Kerch or Novosibirsk? So Feodosia is a civilian cargo port to this on the kind of southeastern coast, quite near to the Kerch Bridge of Crimea, and that has been hit continually actually over the last few months. So, but what about Feodosia, Kerch or Novosibirsk for maintenance? Novorossiysk. One, Feodosia does not have a floating dry dock to use. They have a shipyard, JSC Moore Shipyard, but they lower ships using rails and not floating dry docks. 2, Kerch houses Zaliv Shipyard, the largest shipyard Russia has in the area. Although they can use their one assembly slipway to house multiple vessels for deeper repair, the yard is currently occupied by blocks for the project 23900 LHD and 2 cable laying ships. While Zaliv also has a floating dry dock of its own, it isn't really used for maintenance. It's used primarily as a transfer dock to transfer ships from open slipways. 3, Novorossiysk houses the Novorossiysk Ship Repair Centre. This yard was not known to everyone until one ship, Olengorsky Gornyak, went there and had its holes patched up to be sent to Samorzavod for a thorough repair. This yard is the closest to the Novorossiysk naval base. While it has dry docks large enough to accommodate most, if not all, the vessels of the Black Sea Fleet, it isn't set up for military maintenance, unlike the 13th shipyard below this picture there, which has surrounding facilities for machinery repair, etc. Plus, they're not equipped for submarine repairs over in Novorossiysk. Now, Russia faces a dilemma of keeping its fleet intact or having the facilities that support it get crippled, so it cannot be taken out. So it could be taken out of action without even striking the platforms themselves. They can't go anywhere without the facilities offered by Sevastopol's yards. In other words, like the summary of that is that they really don't have the capabilities anywhere else that Sevastopol provides. And if Sevastopol is now weak enough to be hit, or vulnerable enough to be hit by Ukrainian Neptune missiles or Storm Shadow missiles, then hey, they are in a lot of trouble. And those S-400s, Russia really needs up and running around Crimea to help keep protecting Sevastopol. But as we've seen, they are being consistently degraded, those air defense systems, and Russia is in a lot of trouble. Will they have to pull their Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol? Well, quite possibly. And then the functional benefits of annexing Crimea, of being in control of Crimea, suddenly disappear. It's all, as I keep saying, it's all about Sevastopol. Okay, I'm going to go on to a slightly different topic now. So, Chris O, wiki thread, another one. Russian soldiers, this is pretty topical. It's about Andriivka that's been liberated by the Ukrainians over the last few days. Russian soldiers say hundreds of their number are being killed trying to retake newly liberated Andriivka. Even artillerymen are being sent in as infantry in meat assaults, literally armed with shovels and without artillery support. And so, although this might play on several of those tropes that have been hanging around since the beginning of the war, this goes to the Ukrainian claims that the Russians did take really heavy losses in Andriivka and POWs as well, as they were surrounded, encircled by the Ukrainians and then eliminated or captured. To continue, the Russian Army's 94th Regiment is said to be taking the brunt of the fighting as Ukrainian forces advance south of Bakhmut. The wife of one soldier serving with the regiment, a man called Denis, says they are suffering huge casualties. He called on Thursday and said that the Ukrainian armed forces were taking Andriivka and breaking through to Bakhmut, his wife Vera says, and they are being thrown into Andriivka with almost no weapons. He has said, roughly speaking, we are coming at them with shovels and no artillery support. There is nowhere to retreat because behind them, our own men, who will not spare them either, 600 didn't return from their missions, and all this in just 2 days. And the official reports tell us that only 2 or 3 people were killed. In other words, the claims are that there are barrier troops stopping them from retreating. Again, this is an issue that keeps on raising its ugly head, that they have lost maybe 600 troops and they are just poorly equipped. These kind of claims just keep resurfacing, and because of the frequency with which we hear these claims, there has to be something in them. Posts on Telegram say that the men are experiencing very heavy incoming fire. Quote, the enemy does not stop attempting to break through using cluster munitions, Dennis himself says. That the 94th Regiment is being zeroed out, killed. Our regiment is here to be put down. He says that its commander, a man named Zaitsev, with the call sign Rapira, told the men explicitly that they were there to die. He's a local, either from the DNR or LNR. We're his 3rd regiment. He left 2 regiments here, he said, that I'll leave you here too. Now, this is again something we've heard before a number of times, that the LNR and DNR, if they are local people, stacking those regiments, then they've got to a point where they feel, apparently, to some degree, that this is kind of the Russian war now, and that if they're going to be sent, Russian troops, mobilized troops, then those are the guys that the DNR and the LNR are going to send in to do the dirty work because they don't want to give up their own troops. So there's this animosity between the annexed militias and the conventional Russian units, such that the conventional Russian units are seen as the meat to throw into the grinder. Dennis compared Zaitsev unfavorably to his previous commander, who he says was a more humane man. Quote, our last commanding officer got us out of it. That's what got him fired. That he didn't send his men out to be butchered. So that's an interesting nugget as well. So a previous commander getting fired because he didn't want to sacrifice the lives of his men. He confirms that there were originally 1,000 men in the regiment, but their numbers have been reduced to 400 by constant fighting. Quote, we are constantly thrown into the area of Andriivka, which is processed by the AFU artillery. Basically, we are driven there for meat. You give the coordinates to our artillery, what targets we need to work on, and the artillery does not work because they have no shells. And this is again an issue that we're hearing from the Russians, particularly in this area, certain areas, maybe in the south as well. It's possible that the artillery itself may have been destroyed. Ukraine has been targeting it heavily rather than lacking shells. That's the quote from. That's the addition there from Chris Owicki. So it could be that they don't have shells. It could be that they don't have artillery. But I have heard that they don't have shells in the area. Coordination, that's me saying that. Coordination with the artillery has broken down, according to Dennis. Quote, there's no cooperation with anyone else. Everything is very slow. Either the artillery doesn't fire or you have to wait a long time for a shot. Now the men are being sent on meat assaults, which they are not expected to survive. Quote, the orders are to take over Andriivka, take what's left of it, rubble, to put it crudely. Although the commanders themselves know very well, and there is video confirmation that the enemy is constantly working throughout the village. The AFU artillery is working constantly. They send men into the village, but they will not let them come out. This is perfectly well known to everyone, and when you tell the command that this is exactly what is happening in this direction, you are answered, so what? That's a quote. So what? End of quote. Retreat is impossible, according to Dennis, because commanders have positioned blocking units behind the front line to shoot any retreaters. The men believe that they will be killed whatever happens by one side or the other. Exactly what I've said previously, that if you think if we go forward, we're going to get shot. If we stay here, we're going to get RPGs flying at us through sort of drones. We're going to have IEDs dropped on our heads, and if we try and retreat, then our own forces are going to shoot us. So, what do you do? And indeed, I think sensibly, surrendering is by far the best option. But there you go. Dennis says that the men, quote, are not in the mood to die for nothing. If there is artillery support, cooperation, and other units, and there is no ammunition famine, then everyone is ready to fight. But nobody wants to fight like this. He blames the commander's insistence on having... I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Again, you're thinking, well, still, this doesn't put you off the principle of the war itself. You appear to still be in support of doing war. You just complain that you can't do it well enough. No dear. Anyways, to continue, he blames the commander's insistence on ordering obviously suicidal attacks on their false claims that they have not in fact lost control of Andriivka. It's very likely they've also made such claims to their superiors. In another example of the Russian military's culture of lying. And again, this is something that we've seen other Russian commanders complain about recently, quite publicly, that it's about time we stop relying so much on false information and lying. We need to be sort of more truthful to each other. Quote, they tell us in plain words, go and get a foothold there, and we see that our positions there have not been ours for a long time, so we raise a bird, a drone. In fact, it is obvious to the naked eye that our positions there have long since ceased to be ours, but the command claims that they are. We've got 25 men going out on a mission, 6 coming back. Now we have artillery men going to the assault. They were told, you don't have ammunition anyway. Go with the infantry, and the guys don't know what an assault is. Information about our situation does not go anywhere upstairs. It is overridden somewhere in the middle level. That's why we're trying to get the word out now. It is not a good idea to just send people to slaughter. Soldiers from other units who don't know us. If you give them our regiment number, they say, guys, you are being nullified. That's the way it is. His wife, Vera, says that the soldiers and their relatives are afraid to go public with their concerns about the situation. She says that her mother-in-law, quote, wrote to the group of mothers and wives of the mobilised 94th Regiment that our guys are in a difficult situation. They have had no weapons, and she suggests that this information should be spread on social networks, and everyone jumped on her. They say, don't set everyone up. They're more worried about their salaries than their husbands. They're worried that if the names of the rebels come to light, they will simply be made missing and will not receive any payments. Oh my goodness, that is absolutely shocking. So these wives back at home are in a position where, like, they're saying, no, you can't complain about this, because if you complain about it, we won't get our pensions, or we won't get our wages, and that's worse. So, you know, hey, if our husbands die, then so be it. But we need to just hold on to wages and pensions and whatnot. I mean, goodness me. Anyway, Vera doesn't blame them for this attitude. I also understand those who are afraid of publicity. If now defamatory information from my husband goes out, if his surname gets publicised, he will simply be recognised as an enemy of the people. And then this status will automatically go to the children. My husband is also afraid that it will affect my son. At home, reports Radio Freedom, quote, little Fedya sitting on his mum's lap, taps his finger on the photos. On the screensaver is a picture of a young man with his son on his shoulders. Daddy, says the boy. Yes, Daddy. Yes, Daddy, Vera nods. I don't want my son to know his father only from pictures. Dennis's family have not heard from him since his interview on the 16th of September. On the 17th of September, Ukraine announced the recapture of Andriivka. And he may be one of those very many bodies littering the area. And I say littering because they are amongst rubbish as well. I mean, there's some pretty shocking photographic evidence coming out of Andriivka. It's pretty terrible. Anyway, I thought that would give you some context to the fighting and to the claims of what's going on in certain areas of the map. Right, the last thing I'm going to deal with today is a bit of corrective as to what I've said previously concerning why Poland might be in a position where, with a government that is somewhat similar to Viktor Orban's Fidesz political party run by Viktor Orban, we have the Law and Justice Party in Poland, similar kind of political ideology. But why is it that Poland really strongly supports Ukraine and Fidesz do not? And I said it's got at least quite a lot to do with a plane crash that took place some time ago, where one of the twins, these twin brothers that have, I think did they not start in the kind of labour workers, to do with labour and workers in Poland, but then have moved into politics and moved to a kind of nationalist far right. I could be wrong there. But anyway, I was saying that a plane carrying one of the twins went down, and it was carrying, was it 54 or 94 others? But I think there's some kind of 50 something to do with politics there, Polish politics. Again, I may get the stats a little bit wrong, but the point is that this was a huge loss to Polish politics, and they blamed the Russians for the downing of that plane, or for that plane coming down. So I was saying this is one of the biggest explanatory components to Poland's positioning vis-a-vis Russia. And Polish people reached out to me, and particularly one of them, I'll go through his comment in a minute, say actually, that's not how it was. But anyway, let's just look into this plane event. So Vladimir Putin was responsible for the plane crash that killed Polish President Lech Kaczynski, says Polish Defense Minister. And this was back on 15th December 2017, this independent article. So Poland's President Lech Kaczynski, the First Lady, and 94 others died in a plane crash in 2010. Poland's defense minister has accused Vladimir Putin of involvement in the 2010 plane crash that killed the Polish president, as he urged him to take responsibility. Antonio Macierewicz claims that the fatal crash that killed Poland's which used incorrectly here. Bit of grammar, independent. That, or you put a comma. Anyway, that killed Poland's President Lech Kaczynski, the First Lady, and 94 others in 2010 in Russia, was preceded by explosions on board. In a radio interview, Mr. Macierewicz said the Russian president should have the courage to take responsibility for what happened. He told public radio PR24, quote, President Putin should finally face the truth. 2 explosions that eventually destroyed the Tu-154 hit were incontestably identified by official expertise. His comments follow the Russian leader's denial of any explosions on board, as he called on Poland to stop investigating for any potential Russian role in the crash. Responding to a question from the Polish reporter on the annual news conference, Mr. Putin said it was time for Poland to move beyond the plane crash, turn a new page, and grow up. That's a bit harsh. President Putin said he was tired of hearing allegations that the plane crash was a result of Russian conspiracy, drawing a sharp rebuke from Warsaw. Polish and Russian aviation experts concluded it was an accident, but Mr. Macierewicz is heading up a commission re-investigating the crash and alleges it was preceded by 2 explosions, which he says would suggest Russia played a role. Correct use of which there. A previous Polish government concluded that pilot error was to blame for the crash, but Law and Justice ordered a new investigation which concluded this year that the plane was brought down by explosions on board. The new investigatory commission created by Mr. Macierewicz said in April that this year that blasts most likely tore the plane into pieces, killing all 96 people seconds before it hit the ground. Okay, now I said, as mentioned, that this is at least largely responsible for Poland's positioning on Russia. And we have Wolf Spirit Alpha Sigma saying, you start speaking about why Polish right wing is against Russia and pro-Ukraine. It's the second time I've heard you say that. Please stop it. Nothing could be further from the truth. Poland is aware of the Russian menace and has been aware of it for at least 4 centuries. It's ingrained in our DNA. The only pro-Russian elites were that were installed by the USSR communists that ruled Poland from 46 to 89 until the first free elections since who knows when. After 1989, we still had the post-communists in power for 8 years, and they were sympathizing and romanticizing the good old USSR and our Russian friends. For the last 20 years, there's not been a single party that's been pro-Russian. Not even the left wing. Post-communists are gone almost entirely. Communism is banned, just like fascism. The Smolensk catastrophe has almost nothing to do with the stance of the current autocratic and corrupt right-wing party called PIS. That's the Law and Justice Party. So obviously, this guy is not a fan of Law and Justice. I'm not a fan of them at all. I've long said, during these videos that I do for you, that if it wasn't for the Ukraine war and their staunch support for Ukraine, the Polish government would be in quite a lot of hot water with the EU. But they've actually positioned themselves in alignment with the EU, whereas Hungary haven't. So Hungary's feeling the heat of the EU at the moment, and Poland are getting away with it. There are a few articles on this subject that I can point you towards. There's one in Foreign Affairs titled Don't Give Poland a Pass. Warsaw's support for Ukraine should not obscure its assault on democracy at home. That's from July this year. And Ukraine war won't give Poland a free pass on democracy. Few would have predicted Biden and Duda could have become firm allies, but war makes for strange bedfellows. I featured one of these articles and actually didn't end up finishing it earlier this year, but I think it was this one in Foreign Affairs. Interesting pieces, both of them. Anyway, back to the comments. The Smolensk catastrophe has almost nothing to do with the stance of the current autocratic and corrupt right wing in the party, called PIS, that this party is as bad or worse as you describe. But they, being anti-Russian and anti-German, is a thing they blabber about, and they have done for the last 30 years. And I said, look, I'll share your comment because I think it's only fair that I get given a corrective. I'm not Polish. I'm just kind of joining the dots, and sometimes I make a picture that is just a bit shite. So here he's appreciated that I am doing this corrective, hopefully. Now, to finish up today, I'm going to dip into a podcast, the Bulwark podcast, featuring Anne Applebaum, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. Go and read her book, The Twilight of Democracy. It's a really, really good book. But here she talks about how the far right is manipulated by, or at least has great sympathies for, the Russian regime. And I think Russia has some good form for utilizing the far right, or sowing division and discord within politics by trying to manipulate the far right in Europe and America and elsewhere. And I know I've talked about this a lot, and I know some of you who are on the right yourselves and more moderate Reaganism conservatives are saying, how do we deal with this situation? And it's really, really difficult, I think. But it's definitely a project that Russia's been involved in for some time. And Anne Applebaum talks about this. By the way, her book, Twilight of Democracy, is a really good book, well worth getting and reading. But here she talks about this, and I think this is really relevant.
I mean, I think the creation of a far-right echo chamber has been a Russian project for 15 years. So the idea that they would seek to promote extremism and promote extremist ideas and slogans and memes and so on, I mean, I think they've been doing that for years. In fact, I know they've been doing it for years. I mean, you can argue about to what degree it was them and what degree it was a kind of mind meld of them and the existing far right, and to what degree it was just, people were ready for that kind of stuff for other reasons. I mean, I'm not giving them credit for, it's not as if they created this thing, but I mean, they did help. The idea that Western civilization is collapsing, that democracy is a disaster, and that the only thing that can save it is an autocratic or dictatorial power or regime is an idea that's very comfortable for the Russians, because it's in their interest for democracies to be weakened and to fall apart, because then they have free run of whatever they want to do. And it's also appealing to a certain group of, as it turns out, Americans, but also Europeans, who dislike their own societies for other reasons, whatever. They dislike modernity, they dislike feminism, they dislike too many refugees, immigrants, whatever it is they don't like about modernity and whatever they dislike about their systems, they have this alternative, and the alternative is an autocratic one. That is the appeal of Putin, and Putin understood that appeal, or the people who work for him did, and they've sought to feed that and nourish it. I mean, there's an additional thing, which is
Yeah, I think this is really fascinating, and I think it rings a bell with me completely. I've seen this kind of manipulation of some of those talking points. We talked about Russian trolls, Internet Research Agency, and getting onto those really divisive issues, and then driving a wedge in foreign nations and in populations in foreign nations, and exploiting that division that they help to create, or at least they don't necessarily create those divisions, but they feed off them and expand them.
Russia has been very good at selling a completely fake image of itself as a, white Christian country defending the world from Islam. Actually, Russia is 12% Muslim, something like that, and we're not sure of the real numbers. There's a province of Russia, this Chechnya, which is actually run by Sharia law. I mean, literally, it's Sharia law. It's not that fake thing, Sweden is run by Sharia law. That's not true. And nobody goes to church there, and something like 5% of Russians have ever seen a Bible. So it's an absolutely made up story. But it works on the far right in the way, I think, that the ideal of communism once worked on the far left. Look, our society is terrible, and there's this other alternative society that's better. And there's something like that going on. And the Russians understood that because they have been doing that kind of propaganda for a century, and they encouraged it.
Where do you think
I just think that's a really interesting conversation. I'd love to, goodness me, I'd love to have a conversation with both of them about the political positioning of Russia and their manipulation of divides in foreign countries. I think, there's a lot to mention there. Anyway, let me know what you think about that. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate your support. I'm going to leave it there today. And thank you so much to all the fabulous members of the channel. You are all awesome. Take care, Toodle Pips. Speak soon.